Okay. So today we have as a guest Oliver. So Oliver is the founder and lead gamification designer of Luducrafts, and he will talk a bit about gamification design related to adult change-oriented education. So now I leave you the floor to make your presentation.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for having me. So, as Al mentioned, today's topic and the topic of this last webinar in this course is dedicated to the idea of the serious games and how they relate to the topic of change-oriented adult education. And so what I want to go through today is I want you to understand the concept of the serious game, how it is described, what it is, what it isn't, understand how it's related to the field of change-oriented education. We will go through several examples of how it might look like and how you can use it maybe in your own practice. And I want to end it with the, let's say, some of the recommendations that you, as a professionals in the field, can maybe take and try on your own. So I will try to help you with some of the creative strategies that you may apply when thinking about some serious games. So that is our quest for upcoming 45 minutes or so. So let's dig in. So yeah, as was mentioned, I work as a gamification designer. So that's what we try to do. We try to use game design and serious games in order to create a better world. And recently we were lucky enough to celebrate the 5 years, hence the cake on the slide. So why serious games? So when we come to the topic of why we should even focus on the games and with relation to the adult education, and especially change-oriented education, I often like to start the topic with the photographs of these people. As you can see, there are people who are captured while playing games. And as you can see, the emotions of these people are quite strong. You can see dedication, you can see focus, you can see engagement, and it's often the wishful thinking that we might create such experiences within our learners or participants on the education and trainings. And so by looking at these pictures, we often think of, okay, how it is possible that we are enjoying games so much and that the games can create such experiences. And that is basically the idea behind the whole field of serious games and gamification that asks the question, if games are designed, can we use their design patterns elsewhere? Because of course the thing that you are enjoying the games and that you are feeling the experience isn't made by a chance. Someone designed the game and someone used a specific design patterns for the game, and we are asking if we can use these elsewhere. And the blue addition to this question is if we are able to use it for a good purpose, which is something that I want to emphasize, because as was mentioned in the previous modules and the previous webinars, the change-oriented education can be used both ways, and we as designers and the educators should be focused on using it for a good cause and not to misguide people or do it for the wrong purposes. So I tried to come up with the definition, and as it usually is, someone made a much better definition of it. So I tried to cite the well, I will not go through all the names because it was a collective work, but you can see the source over there. And I think they summarize quite nicely what the serious game is. And the serious game is a game designed for a primary different purpose than the pure entertainment. So I think it's nice and simple, but it helps you to understand how it differs from, let's say, a game that you will just play because you are bored and you just you just pick it because you want to experience some fun. Serious games often try to solve a real life problem or try to tackle a real life issue. And I will try to illustrate it on a few examples. So if we think of serious games as a concept that tries to solve a concrete problem, let's say how we can improve recycling. And it might look like this. This is basically a trash can where you can throw glass, and they change it so it look and resembles as a game arcade from the 80s and 90s. And the rules of the games are quite simple. You just throw the bottle to the dedicated hole that is signaled by blinking of the light. And if you do, then you will hear the response of a form of sounds, and you can even collect the score. And it's generally more fun than just go out and pick up trash and throw it into the bin. Of course, we can now discuss if this is the serious game. And yeah, to be honest, it's not really a serious game. This is something that's often called a gamification or a playful design. And if you look on this particular example, you can see that it certainly can create a change. It can change the behavior of the people, because if you search for this bottle bank arcade, you can see that people are voluntarily picking up the trash, and they are trying to throw as many objects into the trash can as possible. But of course, if you remove this this bottle bank from the street, it's questionable if the people will still continue to collect the trash and throw it to the regular bins. So it is a serious game, but if it's so change oriented from the short term, of course it is. From the long term, it's questionable. Therefore, we can try to look on a different example. So take a problem like how to improve digital literacy and fight against the fake news. And here is I would say, the flagship of our discussion. And I think this example came up with the previous modules, but I think it's worth it to mention it once again. It's a nice online game which is called Bad News. And it basically teaches you how the fake news are produced, what are the techniques that the internet trolls are using. And it is really built as a game. You can feel the aesthetic of it is a game like, and it has a certain rules, and you just play the game. But the change-oriented aspect of it is that since you are in the shoes of the internet troll, you are able to see it from a completely different perspective, and it's much more effective for you to understand how does the fake news industry is operating when you are sitting on the other side. So yes, we can definitely check that this is a nice example of a serious game. And the third category that I think can somewhat fit into the topic of the serious game is the games that are trying to deal with the particular problem, but they are not necessarily outspoken of it. Let's say you want to develop a critical thinking when facing conspiracy theories. And again, it's something that is really present at the moment. And this game, this is an offline game, is basically teaching you how does the conspiracy theorists think like, what are the arguments that they are using, and how they are trying to persuade other people. And while this game was designed with the goal of teaching people to be more aware of the false arguments and the conspiracy theories. It's not marketed like that. It's still marketed as a regular game, but it was designed with a higher purpose. And I think these three examples are showing us that there is a spectrum of how the serious games can look like, from a simple interventions that are more playful through something that is a full-scale game to something that is really an educative game, which is presented in that way. So why are serious games fit for change-oriented adult education? From my experience and from my point of view, they are really good at creating opportunities in which you are able to try out different strategies, and therefore they lower the bar in which the change can happen. And as you can see, if you take your favorite game, you can see, and especially when you take a role-playing games in which you are playing for a certain hero and you are part of a certain story that you are co-creating while playing the game, you are basically going through some kind of a transformative experience. The game is evoking empathy. They often use a positive feedback that keeps you in the comfort zone, so you are more likely to explore maybe different strategies, maybe different behavior patterns of yourself, and while be in the safe spot and the safe space of the game, you are feeling free to try it. So therefore, I think from my experience, if you allow people to experiment, to change the different approaches, to see their problems or challenges from a different perspective while feeling safe, it's much better for them to be maybe willing to change, because they can actually try out the change and try out the different approaches while keeping a safe distance, so-called. And there is a second aspect that I think especially suits the digital games, and when it comes to let's say e-learnings and let's say informative campaigns, games are really good for grabbing attention, for attract learners. And one of the things is that they are, of course, engaging by design. The games are interactive medium, so it's not like, let's say, this webinar when I just talk and I hope that there is someone who is listening on the other side. But of course, you can see that in the games, you are actively asked to participate, which of course is something that we tend to like more than just passive consumption of the information. Yeah, and you can see that there is the mention of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And this is actually quite interesting. If you do a research and ask people why they are enjoying games, why they are playing games, they tend to answer things like, I can feel a deep satisfaction of overcome an obstacle, or I can get the sense that I accomplished something, or I just stepped out from my comfort zone and try different things. And these are fitting to the higher rows of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So the games allows us to feel the sense of self-actualization, and they satisfied somewhat the need for a higher purpose. So that's why I think when we use games as a tool to attract learners and to try to address some of the issues and perhaps motivate them to make a change, they can be actually a nice medium for that. So if you want to take, let's say, some key takeaways of how and why we shall be inspired by the game design, I often tell these four basic rules, or I think that's the secret sauce, basically. The one is that the games allows you to feel the sense of autonomy. So in the games, you are the one who is holding the reins. So it's up to you, how do you want to win this game, and the sense that you can make it as you wish, that you are in the control, is really a powerful thing. The second is the feedback. In the games, you always know what are you doing, how it is affecting others, and through that you can easily do a reflection of how it is affecting you. The third is that the games are built around giving you the adequate challenges, so they take a really good care not to frustrate you too much. And if you overcome some kind of an obstacle in serious game, you have a sense of you are proud of yourself. It's called epic win when you really discover what are you able to achieve. And I think the empowerment of players is something that in the change-oriented education we have to be aware of, to keep our learners empowered when needed, and to give them the helping hand when needed. And that is to create a sense of safety. And if you digest the game design, if you try to take a closer look on how the games are delivering information and how they are built, the overall structure, you can see many patterns that respect these four takeaways. And if you try to apply these takeaways into your learning activities, I think it's a good step to create more change-oriented, friendly environment. Now, I understand that this was a little bit theoretical, so I want to show you and present you some of the examples of how this might look like. So one of the great examples is a game called Tro Factory. Again, it's the similar topic like bad news. This time you are literally the internet troll. And since you can see, it's a very simple interface where you are chatting with with your secret boss, who is giving you the assignments, and you have sometimes you have, sometimes you don't have the chance to take action. And it teaches you how to spot the fake news, how to understand how it's created, all the nuances. And on one hand, it's really fun, and on the other hand, you would be surprised how many things you can take away from that game. I remember when I played the game, I immediately realized how many hooks and slippery slopes there are on the internet communications, and I still remember some of the most common tactics that the internet trolls are trying to use. So I highly recommend to try out this game. By the way, I will post the links to the Moodle platform for each of these games, so you can try and check them out by yourself. Another game which is completely different is the one called Train, and this is actually an offline game, and as you can probably guess, it's not really a funny one, and it tries to cover and discuss the theme of our relationship with the authorities and our own conformity. And basically, the game is about that you as a team have to fulfill the quests that come out from this historical typing machine, and the quests are basically, you need to pack those small yellow guys into these wagons, and you don't need to worry where those wagons are basically heading to. And of course, as you might be aware, this is this has a bitter end, because you are an operator of the train that is heading to the Oswiecim. And this game is objectively a serious game. It's not fun. And perhaps one of the strongest takeaways is that the outcome of the game is basically you have to decide that you don't want to take these orders anymore in this game. So So it tries to push yourself to the limits in a way of how much are you conforming to listen to, let's say, a propagandic authority that you never question, and where does this can lead. So a completely different approach with very powerful outcomes. Another slightly dystopian theme is a game called Paper Please, and again, it's a game where you take a part of the Coast Guard, who is basically trying to decide who can enter the fictional country of Arstoshka, and who not. And the game very cleverly pose a moral conflicts, because of course the people have some backstories and they are trying to sometimes bribe you, sometimes it's up to you if you want to take advantage of their situations. And again, it's a game in which you are able to explore your own moral integrity. And it's not fun in the terms of the lighthearted aesthetics and humor, but it allows you to have a really sincere conversation with yourself and maybe adjust your own views on some of the moral issues and challenges of today's world in a different perspective. Another game that chooses a complete different approach is a game called Buffalo. And what it does is that you have basically two deck of cards. Each represents a different adjective and a noun. And basically you are just making a combination. And if some of the players will name a name or drop the term that fits the combination, he earns or she earns the point. So if you have a combination of British wizard, then the first player who will shout out, let's say, Harry Potter, will get the point. So easy as that. But since those two decks are shuffled and the combinations are random, you might get the combinations that are, let's say, Iranian economist, or you can have a combination of female astronaut. And of course, these are the combinations that are not really that obvious for many of people. And so you have to start thinking, you have to start Googling. And that's what the game wants you to do, is about to draw attention to the topics that you might not be aware of, that you might not think about normally. And it works just nicely to maybe fight some of the prejudices. What the game does in a clever way is it's not marketed as something that is trying to fight your own prejudices, because you can imagine that if you come to your local party and bring this game and say, hey, let's play a game about prejudices, and then I'm not sure how many people will be happy to play this game. But since it's marketed as a simple party game, you can still enjoy it and you can still get the educative aspect of the game. One of the strongest examples is a game called Bury Me My Love, and it's a game about the struggling path of refugees, and it's played as a simulation of a dialogue between family members who are currently taking a part, and one of them is trying to cross the borders to the Europe, and you are trying to provide encouragement, but only via text messages. And by playing this game, you suddenly feel and understand the context in its much more complexity than just digesting the news and trying to read some articles, because now you have to face the similar decisions, the similar emotions, the similar struggles, and it creates much more empathetic response and an understanding of the situation of the refugees. Now, how to maybe approach the serious games, because what I tried to illustrate is that the serious games can take a different shapes. It can take a shape of a full-scale digital game that you can play on your browser, and you can play it alone, and it still can provide these reflections that try to push you to the change of maybe opinions or behaviors, etc. On the other hand, it doesn't have to be a digital. It might be an offline game that still tries to tackle the current challenges on the social media. The game about the conspiracy theories is trying to teach you how the conspiracy theorists are basically using tools like Twitter or YouTube, and how they develop their arguments for their causes on these platforms. So it is an offline game, but it has the effects in the digital space. So one of the takeaways of this webinar should be that you can still create a serious game or use serious game that is offline and use it as a group activity, but it still can tackle the current sometimes digital challenges that we are currently facing. And so, how to approach when someone wants to try or maybe perhaps develop the serious games. So there are 3 strategies for creating serious games that we usually use and apply in our studio. The first is adaptation, and basically there are many games that are fine just as they are, and they were built with the purpose of engagement first. But you can take a look on them and you can try to twist them a little so they can suddenly serve as a platform for your training course and calls. So when you try the adaptation approach, you take an existing game and add a little twist. And we will, I will show you some example shortly after this. The second approach is the simulation. That is when you are trying to create game from scratch. And if you are not the game designer, the simplest thing is to try to look on the problem that you are trying to cover with the serious game, and try to simplify it to the most possible way while keep still the core experience. So imagine you want to teach how does the democracy works and what are its cons and pros. And so you might try to simulate the process of passing the bill, let's say. And so you might to simplify the process to the level that still can translate and still can communicate the frustration of fighting for some kind of agenda, and trying to push the bill through the government body, etc. And the third principle is try to build some kind of a metaphor that can serve as let's say a good attention grabber that allows people to try out the game, and suddenly they realize that, okay, this is actually a metaphor for something else. And I have a example of that as well. So let's maybe talk about the adaptation technique. Take, for example, the Monopoly. And the Monopoly is a great game because at least many of you have tried out the Monopoly, or at least are familiar with the concept. And it is a game that by its nature have a several let's say social issues designed within, and you can use Monopoly as a exercise to address the social injustice, and you can do it in a way of perhaps you can divide players by let's say, random criteria. So you can say people who has green eyes, that they have to pay twice as much on the parcel as people with blue eyes. And if they protest, you can say, well, that's just the world it is. And of course, once they will play the game, they understand how hard it is if you just don't play with the same rules. And I saw this experiment being played with the kids in the French school, and you can see suddenly how their eyes open because they suddenly understand the complexity of the institutional social discrimination in its naked form. And you can create these strong experiences just by adjusting the rules of the monopoly. And you can perhaps maybe find a different games that you like, and you can ask yourself a question of how could perhaps game X help with DI? So if you ask, how can Monopoly help to understand the social and gender inequality? You can start with your topic is social and gender inequality, and you can try to find out which games might suit our needs, whether they are dealing with a similar topic or they are dealing with the mechanics that can be easily adjusted. I see the comments that people with blue eyes are offspring of aliens. That could be actually a good conspiracy theory in the game. The other approach is the simulation, and you are watching the screenshot from the game, This War of Mine, which is dealing with the horror of the games of the war in Yugoslavia, and you have to experience it from the citizen point of view. And I think that's the key aspect that they are trying to achieve, is that most of the games that are out on the market, and at least most of the popular games, are trying to deal from the point of view of the soldiers. But if you take the approach of the citizen, which when it comes to it, most of us will face, or hopefully will not face, but in the war, we are most of us will be on the side of the civilians. So you need to understand how it is, and perhaps by creating this emphasis and this experience of of such horrible events, you might get a different approach and different views on not only this particular historic matter, but on the aspect of war in general. So what they try to do is to try to pick out what are the key experiences that we want to communicate, and they tried to communicate it via platform of this digital game. So in the simulation approach, you have to understand and asking yourself what should be the key message. What are the essential emotions that I want to evoke in my players, and what should be the key learning takeaways. And the third strategy is a metaphor. And this is an example of a serious game that is trying to teach you why it is useful to pay taxes. And of course, if you are in the country where paying taxes is considered as not as much of a honorable civic behavior, it's nice to have a tool that explains people that actually taxes has its meaning in the society. And so what this game is trying to do, that it is trying to lure you to the metaphor of a historical fictional country in which you are the king, and you are trying to hold as long as possible. But in the game, you will be faced with several challenges, and you realize that some of the challenges are too big or too specific to be solved by one person. So the game basically force you into the decision that, all right, we probably need to collect some taxes. And since it's promoted as a fun, highlighted and sorry, light-hearted topic and theme, you are more willing to try out. And by playing the game, you are suddenly realizing that, okay, now I understand that they are trying to communicate this point of view, which I would probably on the normal day would avoid and don't want to think about much. So yeah, so when it comes to the metaphor approach, you are trying to think of what could work as a good vessel for our message, how we can maybe attract the complexity of the topic and make it more approachable and basically create the aha effect more easily. So when it comes to where to go next, there are lots of serious games that you can try out on your own. There are several good platforms that you can visit. Most of the games are either free or have a special type of licenses that you can use as a trainers or as a part of the education field. If you are curious about how maybe you can try the to create some kind of a serious game, I highly recommend to try it. You can take some time to create some game jam, so you can try to take a 1 day for a collective workshop and try to figure out the adaptation strategy. So bring the games that you like and try to give them a different spin. Or maybe if you have a concrete and specific topic that you want to work on, then perhaps maybe you can try on your own. I highly recommend it. So as I mentioned, it doesn't have to be a digital game. It can be an offline game. Either with a simple paper prototype can still can go a long way. So yeah, I tried to gave some interesting links and talks and papers that describes this topic in a more complexity. And if there are any questions that you might love to ask, then feel free. Otherwise, if you are shy, then you can always reach me out on the email or on the Moodle platform. So I invite you to try out the Moodle platform if you didn't already. There is a forum section where in which you can share the inspiration and a different type of games. So feel free. Otherwise, now it's a time to question and answers, if there are any.
Thank you so much, Oliver. It was really interesting. So are there any questions from anyone around? For now, I don't see anyone typing. So I will start with one question for you then. So is there any library of examples that we can use and that you can give us like a link or somewhere to access it?
Yeah, absolutely. It will be on the Moodle platform, and you can definitely check out the Games for Change platform. It's typed Games for Change, and there you can find a list of dozens of games that you can try it out, and they are really with very specific topics or in more general. But yeah, that's probably the first place to go.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, can you recommend an example of using a generic software or tools for this? Yeah, basically, it depends on what kind of level are you in the let's say programming skills. But there are several platforms. You have a game maker or maker RPG maker is one of the very famous one, and it's basically quite intuitive. It's easy to dive in, and it allows you to create basically Japanese style RPG games where you can move your character, you can create the dialogues, and it's really, really customizable. So you can create any topic, any journey, and even we created one game purely in it, and it worked just fine. So that could be a one. Yeah. I wonder if someone has created a game about coronavirus spreading. Well, there was a mini game when one of the AAA games came out, which dealt with the topic of deadly virus spreading across the world, and they did a neat campaign where you can post your address. It downloaded your actual map of the area, and you played as a patient zero, and it tried to show you that if you are not feeling well and you are taking a bus to the hospital, perhaps, it was able to count how many people you actually affected and infected. And so by the end of the exercise, you were able to see that it took only 10 days to spread across the whole world. And that was a few years ago. And it was really scary as a campaign, but it really proves the point. Another game that is dealing with this is called Pandemic, which I think maybe some of you know. It's a well-known desktop game in which basically you are playing as a virus, and I think it's a good starting point for creating a discussion and trying to understand how and why we need to take some kind of measures in order to stop the virus. But frankly, I think I didn't happen to see any specific game that is tied to the COVID-19. But there is a nice page which is dealing with the collection of a different design interventions that are trying to cover the COVID-19. I think it's under the Design Vanguard platform. So if you type Design Vanguard COVID-19, you should be able to find it. It's a collection of nice initiatives and nice design approaches and interventions that are trying to cover the current corona situations.
Okay. Are there any other questions, or maybe you want to share some experiences with gamification and education?
It was exhausting.
So from Erica, my organization is implementing a project with the aim of creating a game for adult education. The aim of the game is to simulate the life cycle in order to improve decision making and some other internal skills. What should we consider more when creating the game?
Wow. First of all, good luck, and I hope that the game would be success. Well, so basically, you need to be aware of the motivation of your players as a first rule. You have to understand what are their motivation, what are their needs that you are trying to address in the game. Secondly, you need to understand what kind of the game it should be, and there is a good checklist that you can run, and it's about how much time these people have on their hands. If they will be playing it in the moderated environment, it will be part of some course, or it will be a game that can random people access and play, and or how much of the content and what kind of content we are trying to communicate. And that leads you to the, let's say, that can narrow the design framework of your game a little bit. So you can suddenly see that, okay, it has to be a text heavy text game in which there is a lot of reading, And if our players have only, let's say, 10 or 15 minutes that they can spend in the game, it really draws the constraints that you need to follow. Generally speaking, try to make it as quick as possible, as encouraging as possible. And if you have in mind that it will be played by more people, then try to think of what kind of social interactions and dynamics we want to enhance. So that would be from the first things that came to my mind.
So we have another question in the Q&A. Do students use games easily or have any difficulties?
Yeah, this is a surprisingly complex question because it really depends on with whom you are dealing with. If we are talking about, let's say, low-income families and perhaps people who have a poor digital skills, they will probably struggle with the digital games as well. And many of these games tend to be really complex systems, and you have to be aware of how to introduce it to the players. So when you are designing a serious games that you know that the people will be play only perhaps once, you need to take some time to design it in a way that it's really easy to get on board with it. So you can add the complexity later on, but make sure that it's easy to jump in and that the players can start play immediately. So yeah, so if the students are from the gaming background, if they have some experiences with the games, they probably have the gaming vocabulary and can jump easy to it. But it's always good to have in mind that there are people who are not heavy gamers, and we need to reflect that and try to give them helping hand, even either in the tutorials or in the first rounds of the games.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so
It doesn't look like there are more questions. I don't know if someone wants to add something else. If not, I think we can leave it here.
yes,
So
normally.
thank you a lot, Oliver, for the presentation. It was really interesting and really nice, and thank you all for participating here. You will have the recording soon in the Moodle platform, so you can rewatch it again if you want to.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Okay, so thank you everyone and have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.